Yeah, everybody got a sheet? Speak now or forever hold your peace. We'll be looking at Esther chapters 2 and 3 tonight. Started the book of Esther last week. And basically studied about how Vashti, who was queen of Persia, ended up getting dethroned. And so that's kind of going to set the stage for chapter 2. We're going to talk about how Esther becomes queen. And then in chapter 3, we're going to look at a sinister plot that begins and is developed and put into effect that's designed to wipe out the Jews. So question number 1 is always on our handout, is usually a think about it, or kind of has to do with the theme of what we're talking about tonight. It's going to do more with the theme of choosing a new queen. And so the question is this: what does our society believe are the most important traits or qualities in a person?
Probably money and status.
I would say that's a pretty good place to start, wouldn't you? Money is pretty important in our society today. What is your social status? You know, are you famous? Are you well known? Are you not? That's important. What else? Anything else come to mind?
Looks.
Looks, yeah, beauty, outward looks, physical attractiveness. That's something that's emphasized within our society, right?
You know, but really when you get right down to it, most people appreciate honesty.
Yeah.
Honest person.
Yeah. And here's, well, I'm kind of thinking of it from the standpoint, too, of choosing a new queen. And when you think about, if you read chapter 2, had some time to go through it, what were some of the qualities that they emphasized in choosing a new queen?
Beauty was first.
Yeah. Beauty and what else? Yeah, youth, right? That's things that are, again, valued in the eyes of society. So kind of interesting when you think about, of course, we're reading about a pagan empire here, the Persian Empire. The main attraction, or I guess the main emphasis when it came to choosing the new queen was she had to be beautiful and she had to be young. And it's kind of interesting when you read about them, you know, going out throughout the kingdom. Were they looking for honesty? Were they looking for, you know, good personalities? No. The only thing they were looking for is young and beautiful women. And kind of gives you an idea, again, of the difference between society and again, I mean, when it comes to God and what He values or what He places importance on, it's always going to be different than the world, isn't it? And so those aren't things that really concern God. You know, are we beautiful? Are we young? Do we have lots of money? Are we well known? Those aren't things that God values, but certainly the world does. So let's talk a little bit about Esther and how she became queen. Again, last week we already studied about how Vashti was removed from that office, which opened the door for Esther. And so in chapter 2, you begin to read about that process. And question number 2 on your handout is this: what did the king's attendants propose? And why did they propose? You can answer both at the same time if you want. What did they propose? Yeah, verse 1 is kind of an interesting verse because you start reading about it, and I believe, where are we now? Over in, I was trying to think about the exact, are we like 8 years removed from Vashti? I think that may be correct. Let's see if I can find it real quickly here. If I can't, we'll just move on. Yeah, in chapter 3 and verse 7, it says this: in the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus. This is when right before Esther becomes queen, or right after she becomes queen, and before this commandment is put into effect. If you go back to chapter 1 and verse 1, you'll read that this queen was removed in, let's see here, verse 3, the 3rd year of his reign. So I guess we're actually about 9 years, right? 9 years removed from Vashti being disposed. Does anybody know what's happened in between that space? This isn't in the Bible. This is just historical.
Those during the Greece campaign.
Yeah, remember Xerxes wanted to invade Greece. That's why he was throwing this big banquet to try to impress everybody, where Vashti basically defies him, and so he removes her from office. Of course, after that, he launches that campaign to conquer Europe and Greece. Well, he's defeated, and so you can imagine he comes back home, probably bearing a lot of shame, probably a lot less money than he had before, and a lot less resources. And he in chapter 2 and verse 1, who does he start thinking about? Vashti. So I think he kind of started thinking about, man, why did I have her removed as queen? You know, that was ignorant, or that was dumb on my part. You know, I liked her. She was a good woman. And he started thinking about her. And so I think he's having thoughts or second thoughts about, maybe I need to bring her back in. Now, the problem with that is this. If you were the king's counselors who advised him to remove the queen and she gets put back in office, what do you think is going to happen to you?
Retaliation.
You're not going to be around very long, are you? And so rather than allow the king to put her back into office, they come up with this plan. And this plan basically involves, going throughout all the kingdom. He's thinking about, I need a queen. And they said, well, instead of reappointing Vashti here, why don't we do this? We're going to put people in charge of every province, and their job is to go and to find the most beautiful young women that they can find in that particular province, and then bring them back to what we would know as the king's harem today, and get them prepared to spend one night with the king. And so a couple of things that are pretty important, again, when you read about history. This is one of those things where sometimes you read about things in the Bible and you scratch your head and you say, how can things like this go on? But they did. I mean, that's just the reality of it. Their job, the job of those people, was to search for attractive young women, bring them into the king's harem, so basically he could sleep with them and decide which one he liked best. So you can imagine the king here. If you're the king, well, we got a better idea. We'll give you all these young, beautiful women. You can spend the night with them, and then you can pick out of them which one you would like best. A couple of things that we do know about this. Turn over to 1 Kings chapter 11 real quickly. Well, we don't even have to do this. You probably know the answer to this. Whenever you read about Solomon, remember Solomon, he had how many wives? 700. And then he had what was called concubines. How many concubines did he have? 300. Concubines were those women who had spent one night with the king, but they never got to royal status. And basically what you had is, if you were among these people, who were chosen, and you got to spend one night with the king, then you basically got to live in the palace the rest of your life. Now, the king wouldn't allow you to marry anybody else because he'd slip it. But he's not going to take you as his wife, but, kind of as a payment or reward, you get to live a life of luxury here within the king's palace. And that's what this house is that we're reading about here. So basically these women, were going to be on call to satisfy the king's sexual desires. And verse 8, I don't know how many it was, but verse 8 said there were many. There were many of these women who were gathered. So that, again, that idea to us, if the king liked you, you became one of his regulars. If he didn't like you, you got to go back and live out the rest of your days in the king's palace, enjoying all of his resources. But that idea to us seems foreign, doesn't it? Because of the nation in which we live, probably seems a little bit sick and a little bit disgusting. But if you go back and you study the empires in that time, that was the way they operated. Just everyday, ordinary occurrence for them. And some people, again, might ask the question, well, how could they do something like that and tolerate it? Well, you really didn't have a choice. I mean, the king was in charge. Whatever he decided, that's what went. Not mentioned in this passage, though. If you'll study historically, there's a Greek historian. We'll talk a little bit about him, some of the things he writes about, Herodotus. But he also made this statement. Every year there were 500 men, young men, who were chosen from the kingdom, made eunuchs. You know what that means, right? They were castrated and put into the service of the king. I mean, that's just how they operate. Your your daughters, your sons, they belong to the king. And whatever he wanted them to do, that's what they did. And you didn't question. And so that's the proposal that's put forth. And again, the king, we've already studied last week. Was he a pretty sensual guy? I mean, what about his party? Do you remember? Oh, all the alcohol you can drink, right? And that he wasn't the guy who held back. And so to be able to take advantage of this, he probably thought, yeah, that's good for me. That's a good opportunity for me. So we read about, in the midst of this, we read about two people that are going to become pretty prevalent throughout the book of Esther, Mordecai, and we're introduced to Esther herself. So question number 3 is this: what background information do you learn about here in chapter 2 about Mordecai and Esther? You can divide them up. Let's talk about Mordecai first. What do we learn about him? Yeah. He had come over where his family had come over into captivity whenever Jehoiachin, probably might remember his name, might not, been a few weeks since we talked about him, but whenever Jehoiachin was carried into captivity. And so his family had been in captivity since then. He was one of their descendants. What else do we learn? Okay, he was of the tribe of Benjamin. Anything else? We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on here. So we're introduced to him, and then we were introduced to Esther. And what do we learn about Esther? A couple of key facts here. Okay, she was related to Mordecai in what relationship?
Mordecai was her uncle. Mordecai was her uncle.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to spend a lot of time going into that, but it's the original language is a little bit different than just where it spells out the relationship. And so a lot of versions just translated cousin. That they were related in some form and fashion. We do know this. What did we learn about her parents? Yeah, they died. I don't know how they died, but it basically left her as an orphan, didn't it? And so Mordecai, being related to her, took her in and raised her as his own daughter. And so you kind of see the development of that, or get that background of the development of that relationship. What else do you learn about Esther? Some important qualities. Yeah. And there's 2 words that are really used here to describe her. One of the words, I think New King James Version translates it as fair. That's a reference to her physical, we might say, shape. And so she was very physically shaped, so to speak. Same idea is used of Joseph as a young man. When Potiphar's wife looks at him, he was a buff dude. That's what I'd say. Physically, his body was in good physical shape. The second word that's, of course, used has to do with beautiful, refers to her facial features. So, she had a shapely body, and she was also very beautiful when you look at her within the face. That's the kind of women that they're looking for, right? Young, beautiful, attractive women to be brought in and given to the king. So, question number 4 here. Esther is chosen, you read, as one of these women as you read through the story. And question number 4 is this: she's treated a little bit differently than everybody else. What kind of treatment does Esther receive whenever she's put into this part of the king's palace, his harem?
It's all the cosmetics.
Yeah.
Everything that she would food, she need.
Yeah, she basically gets a what we would call the royal treatment, right? And why does she get treated differently than all the other young women there?
She pleased the keeper.
Yeah. Haggai, you read about him, he was kind of, the overseer of the king's Harlem house. But it was, he took a liking to her, didn't he? And why do you think that is? I mean, all these women were young and beautiful women, right? Why do you think he liked her more than everybody else?
Probably directed from above.
Okay, there's no doubt that the providence of God has a hand in all this, right? But I think it's a little bit more than that too, don't you? Yeah, she was beautiful. Yeah, she was attractive. I also think that she's a very good person. And there's some things you'll read about as you go through here that kind of indicate that. I imagine she was a kind person. Some of these women, probably like a lot of attractive people in the world today, not really kind people, are they? But she was probably a very kind person, probably a friendly person, probably very personable. We also know this, she stood out to the king, didn't she? There was something that was different about her than all these other women. And again, I don't think it was necessarily just her physical attractiveness, because all these women had to be very beautiful women to even, have a possibility of being put in this position. But I think it was probably her personality and her kindness and her character. And so basically this guy elevates her to the top position. He puts her in the best room in this particular house. He gives her extra treatments. He also gives her 7 servants that are at her disposal to do whatever she wants them to do. And so she receives some pretty favorable treatment there. There is kind of a backstory or kind of something that keeps coming up behind the scenes. And that is that Esther doesn't just come right out and reveal her heritage, does she? She doesn't just openly profess that she's a Jew. And why is that the case? Or why do you think it's the case? Okay, so Mordecai had told her, and we learn in, let's see here, in verse 20 of chapter 2, it says, "Now Esther had not revealed her family and her people, just as Mordecai had charged her, for Esther obeyed the command of Mordecai as when she was brought up by him." And to me, that almost indicates that this is something that Mordecai has told her from a very young age. Don't be open about this. Wouldn't make any sense if she'd been open about it, all the time she was young, and now he says, hush up, be quiet, don't tell anybody anymore. I think it's something that she's been hiding her entire life. And why do you think the Mordecai would be concerned about her hiding her heritage?
Well, they basically brought over slaves. That ain't gonna fit into the Persian way of life.
Yeah.
They were conquered.
Right. And, Mordecai, obviously, he had survived in this atmosphere a lot longer than she had. And, I mean, it's possible that he had suffered some things because he had, his heritage was known. And so maybe just to kind of keep safe, they didn't mention it. They didn't talk about it openly or anything like that. But there's also, to me, if you're putting you're one of these foreign empires and you're putting a Jew in a position of power, what do you have to worry about?
They ruled against the empire.
Okay. Are they going to do everything the king tells them to do? Not if they're a good Jew, right? So if I were looking at this from a national perspective, and my kingdom's concern is first and foremost, I'd probably say the Jews aren't great people to bring into these positions. because there's a chance if you do something that tell them to do something that violates the law of their God, they're not going to do it. And then you're going to have problems. And so I just imagined that was kind of the perspective that a lot of people had about the Jews. But anyway, they did keep their heritage secret. And there are a couple of other things that are kind of interesting. In verse 11 here in chapter 2, and it says, let me get the right verse here. And every day Mordecai paced in front of the court of the women's quarters to learn of Esther's welfare and what was happening to her. So it almost seems like to me that he's kind of worried somebody's going to figure out who she is, and then there's going to be some trouble. But they kept that a secret. They didn't just at first come out and reveal, hey, we're Jews. Question number 6 here, you read a little bit about the process of a woman coming into the favor of the king and having an opportunity to become a queen. What was the only way a woman would get a second chance to see the king?
Did he call her right?
Yeah, basically if the king liked her, right? If the king enjoyed her company and if he asked for her by name, the Bible says. How many women do you think the king spent the night with and never even remembered their names? You had to come into the favor of the king. And so that was the only way that you were ever going to become a queen, is if you pleased the king. Question number 7 here. So what does Esther do when it was her turn to go to the king? What'd she ask for? No, she didn't ask for anything. And I think probably what the reference is here is, the time that it was your night to go into the king, you could request gold, you could request jewelry, you could request whatever clothing you wanted, and it was given to you. And a lot of commentators believe that was yours forever. That was kind of your payment for your night with the king, so to speak. And so can you imagine, again, some of these women, and you're put into that position, what would you be asking for? As much gold, as much jewelry, and expensive clothing that you could, right? So when it comes to Esther's turn, she didn't ask for anything. She takes their advice. They say, here, wear this or take this. She takes it. What else do you want? Nothing. And so it's you can see the difference in her character already as we're reading about her there. Yeah, go ahead.
In verse 16, it says that she went into the king in the 7th year of his reign.
Okay. All right.
And they prepared for a year.
Yeah.
So that went back to the 6th year of his reign when he started this process.
Right.
And he had got rid of Vashti in the 3rd year of his reign, so there was only 3 years span there.
Yeah. Appreciate you bringing that
Best
up.
I could tell.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. I was reading the decree date. I knew I'd seen the date in there somewhere. I was trying to find it frantically. But I was reading the decree date, which year was this? I guess that'd been 6 years later when the decree comes, right?
Right.
5 years. Oh, we'll get the math right. You'll figure it out. But the point that I was trying to make is there's a significant time that's taken place between the removal of the queen and the idea of replacing her with another person. And in that time period, the reason there was so much time is because, like Larry mentioned, he went on the conquest to conquer Europe. And so he's kind of preoccupied, and he loses and he come back and he's probably pouting and feeling down on his luck. So he wants a new queen. But yeah, appreciate you pointing that out there, Daryl. What was I talking about there? I don't even remember.
Esther becoming queen.
Okay.
She didn't bring anything with her.
Yeah, okay, there we go. She didn't ask for anything except what they gave her. And that becomes, I think, an important part of the story a little bit later on, because the king is obviously impressed. He's impressed whenever he spends some time with her. So question number 8 here, how did Esther become queen? Yeah. But it was a combination of things. I mean, she was a very beautiful woman. Undoubtedly, I imagine she was pretty intelligent from what you read about her in the scripture. But I think she had a poise and a behavior that was different from all these other women. And think about this. What problem did he have with Vashti?
She didn't do what he said.
She wanted to be in control, right? And if you have all these women who are asking for all these things, and then you have this one who, I don't need anything. That to a king, that has to be, he has to stop and think, this is a, well, for lack of a better term, she was not a high maintenance female. And so he's like, this is somebody who will probably do whatever I tell her to do. This is somebody who's not going to be constantly coming to me and asking me for stuff. And that becomes important because there's a time when she does come to the king and ask him for something. But think about this. What if she'd never asked him for anything before? I mean, how much of a difference would that have made? Pretty big difference, I would say. But you read a little bit about her character. She impressed everyone, even the king himself. And so I think he says this has got to be the next queen. Question number 9 here. What does Mordecai discover while he's sitting at the king's gate? Yeah. He basically, I think he overheard about a plot that involved 2 of the king's eunuchs who were making plans to kill Xerxes. Now, we read about that, and here's something that you know from history and even reading through the Bible. Just because you were king, did that mean you were safe? How did a lot of these kings get removed? They're assassinated, right? And 14 years later, Xerxes is assassinated. Kind of a backstory to that, but I mentioned Herodotus a little bit earlier. He was a Greek historian, but he said he got fooling around with some of his officers' wives, and they came up with a plan and had him executed in his bedroom. And so he eventually does die by assassination. But Mordecai learns about this plot, and he tells the plot to Esther. Esther tells the king. And what happens to the story?
They had an inquisition.
Okay.
And they determined that they were guilty and they were hanged.
Right. And there's something important, though, that comes into play a little later on as we're going to read here. And that is the official recorder wrote down who was responsible for giving that information. And who was it? No, who was the guy who gave the information? Mordecai. So that was put into the king's chronicles. It was chronicled, put into the king's archives, and that's going to be important as we go a little later on.
What's interesting to me is Mordecai had access to Esther after she had become queen.
Yeah.
Somehow he still had access to her.
Yeah. Yeah, he's well, I think part of it is too, if the queen wanted somebody to visit her, they got to visit her. It didn't matter who it was. And he was family. I think probably everybody, knew that part of it. So it probably wouldn't be unusual to see him there around the palace. But yeah, it is interesting to kind of read about how all these things, fall into their place in time. So you read about that, chronicled in the king's archives, and that's important because of what's going to happen a little bit later on. Let's talk about chapter 3 real quickly here because we're out of time. You'll read about a plot that a man by Haman develops to kill the Jews. And why does Mordecai develop this plot to kill the Jews? What's the motivating factor behind it? Hatred. Hatred of who?
Jews, because Haman or Mordecai didn't out.
Yeah. Haman was promoted by the king to a royal position. And a decree was made wherever he went, you were supposed to bow down before him. Well, Mordecai wouldn't do it. And all these all these people that are associated with the king, they start seeing this and they start asking the question, what's going on here? Why is he exempt? And so they come to Haman and they ask him about it. Did the king exempt Mordecai from bowing down whenever you came around? And the Bible says when he saw it for himself, he became furious. So evidently he hadn't noticed it himself. It was brought to his attention. Now, he does hate Mordecai, but not just Mordecai. Hates the Jews, doesn't he? And so he wants to get rid of them. And here's kind of an interesting tidbit. I wish we had more time to talk about it. What do you learn about Haman in chapter 3 there? What's his background?
He was an Agag. Agag?
Yeah, something like that. Agagite. That's how. Does that word ring a bell to you? Anybody remember the name Agag?
He was the guy that killed,
No, that was Ehud. Ehud, yeah. All right, I'll break the suspense here. Remember, Saul was commissioned by God to wipe out all the Amalekites. Remember that story? 1 Samuel chapter 15. The king of the Amalekites was Agag. Saul spares him. He spares some of the people. But there was a group that came from this king that became to be known as the Agagites. So, the history behind them is this. What had the Jews done to his descendants that made him so mad? Yeah. And Saul spared some of them. He was supposed to wipe them all out. Remember, Samuel ends up killing Agag because Saul wouldn't. But that was the background of the story, and that's part of the reason why Haman is furious and wants to destroy not just Mordecai, but he wants to get all the Jews, doesn't he? And so it's kind of an interesting backstory. You don't always get all those things when you read through it. So he goes to the king. He basically tells him there's a group of people within your nation whose laws are different from everybody else, and they do not obey the laws of the king. And so here's what I propose. Let's get rid of these people, and I'll pay 10,000. Is it 10,000? Yeah, 10,000 talents of silver into the king's treasury if this is done. Sounds pretty good if you're a king, right? Get rid of all these people who are disobeying your laws. And you already lost a lot of resources in this military conquest. Incidentally, this Greek historian that I mentioned a couple of times, Herodotus, he says that the annual income of the Persian Empire in 1 year was 15,000 talents of silver. So Haman is basically offering to pay 2/3 of an empire's income into the treasury of the king for this to be accomplished. And so the king says, man, sounds like a win-win situation to me. Here's my ring. You make the orders and seal it with my ring and send it throughout the empire. And so that's what he does. He makes a decree that on a set day, all the Jews were to be killed and all their possessions were to be taken from them by force. And question 16 here, when that decree says it's published in every place and in every language, he makes sure everybody knows about it. They actually got about a year before this edict goes into effect. Can't really talk about the timeline there, but you can read it within that passage. How does that affect the rest of the kingdom?
Well, if you're a Jew, you got worried.
Yeah. But did they really understand what was going on? The Bible says they were perplexed. What's this all about? Why all of a sudden are the Jews the bad people? Why all of a sudden is the king mad at them? Why all of a sudden, or what did they do to get in the bad graces of the king? And then if you're part of the minority population, what do you got to worry about? Who's next, right? If the Jews this year, what nation's coming next year? And so the people just, Bible says they don't understand what all this is about.